O God, may your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Amen. Amen.
Good afternoon, members. Minister's statement. Minister, a question. Go down in the Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, June is Senior Citizens Month. As the Minister responsible for seniors, I want to encourage all Northerners to join me in recognizing and celebrating the valuable contributions that seniors and elders make within our families and our communities. With a focus on aging in place, the Government of the Northwest Territories has made it a priority to help seniors and elders live in their own homes for as long as possible by ensuring that the right kinds of supports are available in them. For its part, the Department of Health and Social Services continues to make progress to advance the Continuing Care Services Action Plan with a strong commitment to supporting healthy aging and enhancing home and community care services for our territory's aging population. The Department is currently working on the Home and Community Care Review, which will help build a roadmap for where and how we make investments to home care to help support aging in place. This work includes reviewing gaps in services for each region and community in the Northwest Territories, analyzing demand, and jurisdictional reviews of models and protocols. I've said it before in the House, Mr. Speaker, seniors and elders are the fastest growing segment of our population. And one of the challenges that we face is limited access to suitable or affordable housing across the territory. On this front, our government is making steady progress in the right direction. The N.W.T. Housing Corporation recently completed and released a senior planning study that provides an overview of the current seniors population and housing context in the Northwest Territories. Key findings of the study indicate that many seniors in the Northwest Territories face core housing issues. Armed with this information, the N.W.T. Housing Corporation is looking at ways to improve the delivery of the contributing assistance for repairs and enhancements, also known as CARE program, such as using local housing authorities to deliver repair and maintenance services in communities. Improving how we deliver programs and supports to elders and seniors is important, but equally important is continuing to work closely with our Indigenous governments and community partners to improve supports for senior housing in our territory. Mr. Speaker, there are 2 additional days of recognition within Senior Citizens Month, and I'd like to highlight that as well. June 1st is Intergenerational Day, which is a day for all of us to reflect on the importance of embracing intergenerational relationships in our communities and our homes. We know that fostering healthy and respectful connections between people of all ages improves our ability to share traditional knowledge and culture, build resiliency, create safer communities, and address social isolation. To support these efforts, the Department of Health and Social Services and Municipal and Community Affairs are funding a 3-year pilot project, Generations on the Move, led by the N.W.T. Senior Society in partnership with N.W.T. Recreation and Parks Association. The project is designed to encourage healthy aging through intergenerational connections and to increase active living opportunities for older adults in our smaller N.W.T. communities. Currently, the communities of YELLOWKNIFE, Fort Simpson, Y.E.T., Hay River, and Fort Providence are delivering intergenerational projects with this funding. June 15th is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. Raising public awareness about the abuse and neglect of seniors and elders is the first of many steps in preventing elder abuse. Elder abuse comes in various forms, not just physical abuse. For elders struggling with some of these forms of abuse, the Department of Health and Social Services continues to offer a confidential, free 24-hour N.W.T. helpline offering counseling support for residents of all ages in need. We're also working to increase awareness through the department's What Will It Take campaign. This past winter, we developed a video featuring a local Fort Good Hope elder that depicts the subtle but damaging effects of financial elder abuse. This was played in the Yellowknife Theatre, is available online, and there are upcoming plans for promoting this campaign again throughout Senior Citizens Month. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to recognize the commitment to elder abuse prevention by the N.W.T. Senior Society. Leading various elder abuse prevention initiatives, such as providing the It's Not Right workshop on identifying abuse and how to help older adults at risk. The N.W.T Senior Society has advocated passionately to raise the profile of this important social issue that is present in our homes and our communities. They also have a toll-free seniors information line for questions specific to issues on topics of interest to seniors and to elders. We are pleased to be working with them on various initiatives and are truly grateful for their dedication towards eradicating the abuse of N.W.T's aging population. Through strong relationships with our partners, our government aims to provide high-quality programs and services that best support our seniors and elders. Together, with our commitment to aging in place, we are creating a future where seniors and elders can remain safe, independent, and actively engaged in their home communities for as long as possible. I'd like to take this moment to thank all of those involved in enhancing the lives of our territory's aging population. From dedicated individuals to entire organizations, your efforts do not go unseen or unappreciated. During Senior Citizens Month, on Intergenerational Day, and World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, I encourage all residents to celebrate the important role that our seniors and our elders have in our communities and our lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, the Minister, Industry, Tourism and Investment.
Mr. Speaker, our government is following through on its mandate commitment to strengthen connections with our public and private sector partners to secure funding for strategic infrastructure projects across the Northwest Territories. Investments in our public highway systems helps us to connect communities, improve public safety, ensure the effective, efficient delivery of essential goods and services, support tourism, increase our resiliency to climate change, reduce the cost of living, create training and employment opportunities. Investments also help attract interest from industry in the exploration and development of natural resources and pave the way for further economic opportunities. Mr. Speaker, residents and visitors can expect another busy highway construction season this summer. In fact, a total of $75 million in improvements will be made in 8 highways, 2 bridges, and 5 access roads. In the South Slave region, a number of improvements are planned for Highway Number 1. A section of highway will be reconstructed, which includes crushing, stockpiling material, hauling gravel, widening the highway embankment, replacing culverts, and clearing bushes and trees from the right-of-way. This will be a multi-year project with work expected to be completed by 2020. Between Hay River and Fort Smith, 2 sections of Highway Number 5 will be chip sealed, which will mean a much smoother drive for the motorists. On Highway Number 6, also known as the Fort Resolution Highway, chip sealing will be carried out in 2 sections. Mr. Speaker, in the North Slave region, improvements will also be carried out on 12 kilometers of Highway Number 3. This project will include leveling, compacting of existing road surface, crushing and stockpiling material, hauling gravel, replacing culverts. A section of highway will also be chip sealed. Work is expected to be carried over the next year and completed by August of 2020. Further north on Highway 4, also known as the Ingram Trail, roughly 4 kilometers will be reconstructed. We will also be crushing and stockpiling material, hauling gravel, widening the highway embankment, and replacing culverts. In the Decho region, reconstruction work will take place this summer and fall on Highway Number 7, also known as the Liard Highway. This project is currently in the permitting phase, but we expect that section of highway will be reconstructed, and work is expected to be included crushing, stockpiling material, gravel hauling, embankment widening, and culvert replacements. In the Beaufort Delta region, some construction work will be taking place on Highway Number 8, known as the Dempster Highway. Reconstruction will take place along 2 kilometers of the highway. 2 culverts will be replaced, and on Highway Number 10, the N.W.T Highway, 1 culvert will be replaced. Mr. Speaker, in addition to highway improvements, we also be undertaking improvements to 5 access roads, which ensure we can connect communities to our main highway system. Overall, we will be improving approximately 26 kilometers of access roads. In the Beaufort Delta, a section of the Inuvik Airport Access Road and Hospital Hill Drive will be reconstructed. In the South Slave, the Hay River Reserve Access Road will be repaired and chip sealed. In the North Slave and Ray Access Road will be upgraded. In the Decho region, a section of the Jean Marie River Access Road will be resurfaced. Mr. Speaker, We have two major bridge projects scheduled this year. The Hay River to Pine Point Bridge is currently undergoing rehabilitation. This project is expected to be concluded in October of 2019 and will bring a number of benefits for commercial drivers, such as no overhead restrictions. On the Mackenzie River Valley Winter Road, approaches to the Blackwater Bridge will be improved, improving the effectiveness of the winter road. As the construction season begins, I'd like to thank the dedicated workers who put in the long hours to maintain and improve our highway system. Your work is essential to the North. I would like also to remind drivers to watch for highway crews and slow down in construction zones, obey the signs and flag persons along the highway. Mr. Speaker, our government will continue to work closely with all our public and private sector partners so we can continue to build a transportation network that meets the current needs of our citizens and the needs of generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister statements. Minister Ike Godin and the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, our government committed in its mandate to pursue innovative ways to prevent and reduce crime. Today, I want to share with you progress on this work, as well as offer clarity about the way programming is provided to both sentenced and remanded inmates here in the Northwest Territories. Following the release of the 2015 Auditor General's report on the Corrections Service, the Department of Justice underwent a full review of the programs and services provided to individuals in the care and custody of the Corrections Service. In this review, the Department considered feedback from members of the Legislative Assembly, past and present inmates, and the recommendations from the 2015 Auditor's report. This review highlighted programs being delivered in our facilities needed more attention to address the reasons individuals found themselves in contact with the criminal justice system. We also found that substance abuse is the most prevalent issue requiring intervention. As well, violence, sexual offenses, and relationship violence were issues also identified. Most importantly, we found that the lengthy programming being provided based on federal correctional designs did not meet the needs of our inmates and offenders due to the short time most of them are in our facilities. As a result of these findings, the Corrections Service made fundamental changes to create a new program model in 2016, including ensuring that both remanded and sentenced offenders were able to access programming. Programs were designed to target areas of substance abuse, violence, and relationship violence. The new model addressing the likely causes to criminal behavior was developed to be delivered not only in corrections facilities, but also throughout the territories in the community probation offices. Programs at our corrections facilities recognize the importance of Indigenous cultures and traditions. The substance abuse management, violence prevention, living without violence, and the respectful relationships programs are all evidence-based programs aimed at supporting inmates to become aware of the triggers that lead them to engage in unhealthy and unsafe behaviors. All N.W.T. corrections programs integrated Indigenous culture and traditions in the way they are delivered. This is accomplished through the input of elders, traditional liaison officers, and Indigenous staff. Since 2016, over 500 participants have successfully completed programs using this new model. Community probation offices have delivered 47 programs in 12 different communities in the N.W.T, which has resulted in 133 community clients successfully completing programs to target their identified needs. Since its launch in 2016, the Substance Abuse Management Program has been delivered 64 times, including 30 times in probation offices in Yellowknife, Betchico, N.W.T, Hay River, Fort Providence, Fort Liard, Fort Simpson, Fort Resolution, Fort Smith, Inuvik, Fort Good Hope, and Fort McPherson. The Corrections Service also delivers these programs specifically for women at the Fort Smith Correctional Complex Women's Unit and the Yellowknife Probation Office. Since its launch in 2017, the Violence Prevention and Living Without Violence program has been delivered 38 times, including 12 times in probation offices in Yellowknife, Hay River, Fort Smith, Inuvik, Fort Good Hope, and Fort McPherson. Since its launch in 2017, the Respectful Relationships program has been delivered 21 times, including 10 times in probation offices in Yellowknife, Petchico, Hay River, Fort Liard, and Inuvik. As of March 2019, the department has implemented the Northern Addiction Sessions at the South Mackenzie Correctional Centre. Reports and feedback has been positive for this delivery model. Work is currently underway in the development of the Northern Violence Prevention and Northern Healthy Relationships Sessions, which will be delivered with the Living Without Violence and Respectful Relationships program. Mr. Speaker, the importance of providing a method of continuous learning, development, and practice of cognitive, behavioral, and social skills programming, which is why our dedicated staff have developed a maintenance program targeting those offenders who have completed one or more of the programs that address the causes of criminal behavior. Changes have been made to the release planning process that make it possible for case managers to look for community programming options for inmates upon release. Where possible, clients are matched with similar programming so that they can continue to build the skills that are needed to prevent and reduce crime and harm in their lives. We recognize the importance of offering programs and opportunities that support inmates in meeting their educational goals. Inmates have access to programming that includes adult literacy, basic education and upgrading, high school and exam preparation, trades exam preparation, life and employment ready skills, and assistance with pursuing or registration into post-secondary studies. I am pleased to report that over the past year, approximately 130 inmates have accessed the educational programming available within our adult correctional facilities. Mr. Speaker, our goal is to prepare inmates for the rehabilitation and reintegration back into their communities. The Department of Justice continues to ensure that the programming and supports that we offer help to address the individual needs of offenders. Through the efforts of our dedicated corrections service staff and the continued partnerships that we have with other departments and stakeholders, we are making a difference in lives of Northerners and are helping to create safer, healthier communities in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister's statement. Minister Ike Goodin and the Minister N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation has worked hard to meet the commitments made by this government to advance affordable housing and address homelessness during the 18th Legislative Assembly. In addressing this priority, we resolved to use Northern solutions for Northern housing. One example is the Northern Pathways to Housing program, an innovative approach to addressing homelessness in small communities, and we all know there is homelessness in our communities. We know there are overcrowded houses where people couch surf because they do not have a home of their own. Research tells us that chances of addressing the issues that lead to homelessness, mental health, addictions, and other social issues are better when you have stable housing. The Northwest Territories Housing Corporation is working with community groups to develop, design, and implement supportive housing for our residents through the Northern Pathways to Housing program. The program involves providing 4 apartment-style single-room units to community partners, along with funding to pay for additional costs associated with the operation of supporting housing program. The community partner works with the program participants to maintain their housing stability and respond to the particular needs. This support includes connecting them with available services and resources from community agencies. The community partner chooses the program participants through a committee. The program allows the community to prioritize the needs that they see as the most urgent. Our experience with the Lidlokay First Nation and the Klavik Indian Band is providing that this model makes a difference in people's lives. I want to thank those 2 groups for their dedication and their vision. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to announce that a 3rd Northern Pathways to Housing program is starting in Beshico. Through engagement with the Clecho government and the community government of Beshico, the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation has selected the Beshico Friendship Center as a community partner that will deliver the program in Beshico. I anticipate being in Beshico in June to celebrate the project with community residents as well as government leaders. Mr. Speaker, the Northern Pathways to Housing program is one of a kind. It takes a philosophy of housing first, an approach utilized across North America, but tailors it for the Northwest Territories. This truly is a Northern solution for Northern housing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good minute.
Massey. Minister statements. Minister statements. Member for Yellowknife Center.
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to move item number 5 as the next order of business today. Thank you.
Member seeking unanimous consent to move item number 5, recognition of visitors in the gallery, to the next item after minister statements. Are there any nays? There are no nays. Member Yellowknife Center, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues, for agreeing to that change. Mr. Speaker, it gives me pleasure today to welcome to the House a number of women who participated in a series of workshops called Women on the Ballot through the winter, which were presented here in Yellowknife. They are Caitlin Cleveland, Megan Holzapfel, Kate Reed, Jan Vallely, Katrina Knockleby, and Michelle Ramsey. And I hope that they will, in fact, be women on the ballot this fall, and I thank them for coming and seeing what happens in this chamber today. Thank you.
Massey. So, Chungus Ogre again, the Gik, who's on me, good down in the member Grace Leaf.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome the following people from the N.W.T Senior Society who are with us in the chamber today. John Soderberg, who is the treasurer of the N.W.T Senior Society, and Suzette Montreux, who is the executive director of the N.W.T Senior Society. I'd also like to recognize Katrina Knockleby, who is a resident of the Great Slave Riding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I'd like to recognize my wife, Suzette Montreuil, for being here today. I know that she was in the Great Hall earlier for a photo op with the Minister of for Seniors, but I want to thank her for looking after at least one senior in this House after I'm finished here every day. Merci, Mr. Speaker, and I do appreciate her coming to the Assembly today. Thanks.
Merci. Chungus Ogre again, Guyan, the Gik, who's on me, good down in the member Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know I'm breaking convention a little bit because I don't really have a constituent, but I do want to recognize the women that are in the House today that are watching the proceedings. I think it's pretty evident that there's not enough women in the House, and so I'm really proud to see them, and like my colleague, I'm hoping that I'll see their names on ballots. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for South 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To recognize our youth here, the 2 pages from Norman Wells, Summer Rose and Aidan Watson, their chaperone Gillian Brown. Welcome to the experience. Merci.
Merci. Chungus Ogre and the Gik, who's on me, good down in the member Cam Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize 2 residents of my riding of Cam Lake, Caitlin Cleveland and Jan Vallely. It's great to see you take an interest in our proceedings today, and I too am excited to hear about your interest in our democracy and look forward to seeing your names on the ballot as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I want to recognize a page from the Yellowknife North Riding, young Zephyr Jordison from École Saint-Cyr, and thank all the pages for the fantastic work they do on our behalf. I also, too, want to recognize some constituents from the riding of Yellowknife North. Today we have here Megan Holsapple, Michelle Ramsey, and Kate Reed. Welcome and thank you for being here. And lastly, I would also like to acknowledge the Executive Director of the N.W.T Senior Society, which is located in the riding of Yellowknife North, Suzette Monchal. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Masi, member Nanakput.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize Ms. Jillian Brown as well, too. In a past career, I've seen Jillian teach across the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. It's good to see educators making long-term goals in our territory, educating our children. So welcome, Jill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi, recognition of visitors in gallery. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member statement. Member Akwat and Goodanian, the member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, no one is more important in any culture than our elders. This government has shown over time that the money we put into the care and well-being of our elders is nothing short of positive. Mr. Speaker, our elders are more active, healthier, and if I may, looking younger. I want to touch on the elders' home that was started in Fort McPherson some time ago. I believe it's almost near completion and the community is looking forward to the grand opening. Mr. Speaker, it's been a long time coming. There are 8 units in this building, plus one for a caretaker. This will give the community 8 empty units to place other families in, ones that are on the waiting list for housing. I've heard many times that keeping our elders in our home communities makes them stronger. Keeping them near families where they can be cared for, especially keeping them in a home in their community where they feel safe, makes them more comfortable. Mr. Speaker, it's pretty exciting for Fort McPherson. We've had the local contractor finish the work with on-the-job training opportunities for local laborers. Finishing touches are in the works, and we're anxiously awaiting the day our elders can move in. And I'll have questions for the Minister later today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi, member statement. Member Ike Goodanian, the member Nanakput.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as our days get warmer and the ice melts from the lakes and the rivers, residents of our remote coastal communities look forward to being resupplied by marine transportation services. The Nunavut communities rely on the barges each summer for essential goods, fuels, and services which can only be delivered during the summer months in a short operating window. As this House knows, unfortunate weather last August caused the last barges of the season to be cancelled. This resulted in the already high cost of living to rise. I've spoken before about my constituents not being able to afford fuel to go on the land harvesting and hunting, which causes a vicious cycle of then being forced to buy expensive food at the store instead of providing for their families from the land. It was for this reason that I was pleased to hear the Minister say that they're planning an earlier start to the shipping season. I encourage the Marine Transportation Services to use this season to do some long-term planning for future ice conditions, working with Transport Canada and other agencies that are expert in the Arctic sea ice and weather conditions on the western gate of the Northwest Passage, so that they can maximize their chances of completing the all-year resupply routes each year. Mr. Speaker, one way to improve shipping times could be the use of now complete Inuvik to Tuktoyaktuk Highway to bring goods to the coast and then stage shipping from Tuktoyaktuk. This would have the advantage of cutting the sailing time. Goods could start to be collected before the sea ice has broken up, and sailing schedules may be easier to adjust to account for conditions in the Beaufort Sea. Finally, Mr. Speaker, investing not just the physical infrastructure, the docks and wharfs of the coastal communities, but also by mapping the ports of entry into the communities and monitoring any changes to the seabed may also help ensure that shipping season runs smoothly. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to hearing from the Minister on any investments being made to improve marine shipping in the Beaufort Sea and the Arctic this year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Member statement. Member Ike Godanen, the member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I spoke about a Pay Forward program in Fort Simpson. Today I would like to speak about a second program established in the region. It is largely in part to Mr. Troy Belafontaine. In the summer of 2016, Troy became in researching Dolly Parton's Imaginary Library, and in November of 2017, he began accepting registration for this literacy program. The Dolly Parton Imaginary Library is a program that sends one book a month to children between the ages of 0 months to 5 years. The program is partly dependent on donations, as the cost is $3.55 per child per month. All other expenses are covered by the foundation. Initially, Troy himself began the program by donating enough money to have the program run for 5 months. As well, he personally funded all the promotion associated with this program, along with accepting a responsibility for registering the children. Since November, he has received approximately 45 registrations and predicts it will continue to grow. The Political First Nation, the village of Fort Simpson, and other local businesses have donated to allow this program to become operational in the community. After conducting research, Troy established that there are 113 kids in the region that qualify for this program. His goal is to have each of them registered and receive books each month. He would like to expand his literacy service to the other communities in the region, such as Jean Marie, Wrigley, Sumbakay, and Nanny Butte, and to his credit, he has. Troy's personal commitment to literacy is one of his key passions, so much so that he took time off work to attend a literacy workshop in Yellowknife. He returned with initiative to hold local literacy workshops, giving parents tips and tools on how to assist and engage your children in the joy of reading. The books not only assist with literacy, but they contain valuable life lessons. Many of the books teach kindness, caring, and help in others. Troy also operates a successful private business. In November 2016, he and his employee Heather Greencorn discussed giving back to the community and options for paying it forward. Discussion resulted in Heather offering free hairstylings to the residents of the Elders Care Home in Fort Simpson. Heather has been providing this essential service since that conversation to the Elders monthly and remains dutifully committed to this program. I'd like to thank both of them for their commitment and others that continue to do this work behind the scenes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member statement. Member Ike Godanen, the member Fringley.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I'll come back today to the too long and too twisted tale of the former Northern Frontier Visitor Center and the lack of progress reestablishing a tourist information center for Yellowknife. It's been more than 2 years since the facility closed. Back in February 2017, the Minister of Environment had, quote, recently gone out for expressions of interest on possible design opportunities, end of quote. The Northern Frontier Visitors Association Board produced a report detailing the estimated $5 million in additional tourism business generated by the centre and offered 3 costed options for redesign and relocation of the facility. Despite these efforts, the building closed in May 2017 and a visitors operation hopped to the museum, then to the basement of Yellowknife City Hall, where it's been located ever since. When asked the minister a year later in February 2018 what progress towards the new centre had come from the design studies, he said, quote, I think it's a bit early to make a decision on that yet. We're working with the City of Yellowknife to determine the long-term model delivery of the Visitors Information Centre, end of quote. So much for 2017 and 2018. In February 2018 budget session, I asked the minister for a status report again and was told the building is still being stabilized and that the infrastructure department has, quote, recently gone out for expressions of interest on possible design opportunities, end of quote. Media reports have since informed us that $125,000 has been spent to stabilize the building, that officials described as just barely surviving, and that $75,000 was split between 3 design companies for their ideas on building redevelopment. Presumably, with all these suggestions, in addition to the recommendations paid for in 2017, we've got a lot to look at. Other issues have proceeded in parallel, including the passage of law enabling the City of Yellowknife to finance a destination marketing program. But that doesn't result in a storefront visitor center helping our 70,000 annual visitors spend more money in Yellowknife and beyond. Later today, I hope to have questions for the Minister to find out what's going on with the building and how we can improve visitor services for Yellowknife moving forward. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement, member Ikegodan and the member Decho.
Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T has a goal of employing a public service that is representative of the general population it serves. The N.W.T's population is almost exactly 50% non-Aboriginal and 50% Aboriginal. This means that 50% of the N.W.T's public service should ideally be composed of Aboriginal employees. Unfortunately, that is not the case. According to the N.W.T's 2018 Public Service Annual Report, only 30.5% of the territorial government's workforce is made up of Indigenous Aboriginal people, who are defined in the policy as people of N.W.T or Inuit descent, who are born or have lived more than half their lives in the Northwest Territories. I agree with my colleague from Kina-de-Willa-de that the affirmative action policy has failed many Indigenous Aboriginal P1 candidates. The government has to make a commitment to turn this around now, not to leave it to the next assembly. Mr. Speaker, there has been no change to the policy in the 30 years since it was established. It still contains a commitment to do a policy review in 1994. The language is outdated as well. In the policy, quote, Indigenous, unquote, means everyone who has lived half their life in the N.W.T, whether they're Aboriginal or not. Everywhere else, the N.W.T uses the word, quote, Indigenous, unquote, to mean Aboriginal only. The N.W.T needs to get more jobs into small communities to bring the jobs to the people, instead of requiring people to abandon their families and their traditional lands to take jobs elsewhere. Most summer employment opportunities for post-secondary students are in the headquarters and regional centers. DMs or deputy ministers in every department should be challenged to ensure students from small communities can get N.W.T summer jobs. Their tenure and bonuses should depend on it. Some departments are doing better than others. ENR has the highest rate of Aboriginal employees at 45%, followed closely by the Executive Indigenous Affairs at 44%. Departments at the bottom of the list, like lands and health and social services at 22% each, need to prioritize this. I would like to see the Minister of Finance establish a firm commitment that Aboriginal residents of the N.W.T from small communities make up at least 75% of the N.W.T workforce. Human resources staff in the Department of Finance should be working hard to remove systemic barriers, not create them. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my member statement. Merci.
Merci. Member statements. Like another, I saw the sewer. The neck cardion. I make anyone. I think anyone. Member that show such no again. Another member states. Okay.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Merci, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I understand that hiring practices now include the requirement to do a written test to qualify for a job interview. If this is the standard approach across the N.W.T, then it needs to change because it discourages potentially dedicated Aboriginal employees who are deprived good educational opportunities. Mr. Speaker, the affirmative action policy needs to be revised and updated, and the government's political leaders and top senior managers need to recommit today to making the policy's goal a reality. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement. Member, you can go down to the member Yellowknife Center.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm rising today to celebrate a great community and cultural event, the Northwards Writers Festival, which begins tomorrow. The festival was created in 2006 as a 3-day event to provide a stage for Northern and Indigenous writers to welcome established writers from Southern Canada. The Northwards Festival Society was established a year later, and workshops and other literary events were added to the program. Today, the 4-day event attracts around 1,000 people. Emerging and established writers converge to develop their craft through public readings, mentorships, panel discussions, workshops, and a writing contest, as well as informal meetings with each other and guest authors. Northwards promotes the development of young Northern and Indigenous writers by sponsoring events for schools. In 2010, Northwards N.W.T began to reach out to writers in other N.W.T communities with a 3-author tour of Fort Smith, Hay River, and Yellowknife, and the festival now offers events in all 3 communities. The festival took another step forward in 2012 with the publication of the anthology Coming Home, Stories from the Northwest Territories. This anthology featured the work of 17 N.W.T writers, half of whom were being published for the first time. This anthology has enjoyed an extraordinary reception from the reading public and has been an important step in the development of N.W.T writers. It has resulted in increased participation and interest in Northern literary events. Mr. Speaker, the 14th Annual Northwards Writers Festival runs from tomorrow through Sunday. Events include the open mic event Flash, Your 5 Minutes of Fame, the Northwards Cafe, a gala and silent auction, and Blush, an evening of erotic and sensual readings. A lineup of more than 20 writers and authors, filmmakers, songwriters, storytellers, and performing groups will entertain from venues across the 3 communities. It's an event about and beyond words. Congratulations to Northwards and keep on growing. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ike Godanen, member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the most exciting opportunities currently before us is the development of advanced post-secondary education through a polytechnic university. I am proud that in the 18th Assembly we have taken significant steps towards making this a reality, but it's important that it be done right, so it demands our continuing attention and vigilance, even in the remaining months of this Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I see a polytechnic university providing many benefits to the N.W.T, such as significant education dollars will stay here at home. Students can engage in a Northern priority curriculum that will equip them to find career opportunities here at home. Promote affordable post-secondary education for all N.W.T students. Continuing success of existing Aurora College programs and campuses. Address labor shortage issues here at home. Encourage and retain Northern residency. A Made in the North curriculum can be designed to meet the unique needs of both the Northern economy and the student body. Programs can be designed with a staged curriculum to meet both the demand for vocational and trades-based skills and academic research, possibly leading to postgraduate work. A polytechnic university campus based in Yellowknife is a logical choice because of human and civil infrastructure, as well as the demands for housing. As for Inuvik and Fort Smith campuses, I see their communities being enhanced by the increase in post-secondary activities generated by the Polytechnic. Mr. Speaker, the circumpolar regions of the world are gaining increasing international focus. There is huge potential for foreign students attending Northern educational institutions. Foreign students pay tuition averaging 3 to 5 times what Canadian students pay. This is another area of huge potential growth. Finally, partnerships with other Northern, national, and international educational institutions can provide further opportunities, academic and otherwise. Important research is currently conducted by institutions across the Northern Hemisphere. Connections and collaborative partnerships among such agencies can be mutually beneficial. Mr. Speaker, an N.W.T polytechnic institution should take its place among them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good statement.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ike Godanen, member Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, according to the Legislative Assembly's own website, the role of regular members is to sit as the unofficial opposition. They are, quote, responsible through questioning the House and the work of standing committees for holding the government accountable and responsive to the people of the Northwest Territories. For regular members to do their job effectively in holding government accountable and responsive to the people of the N.W.T, regular members require expedient and complete access to information of government activities. In our current system, all information requests by regular members must go through Cabinet and their staff, then to the department, and back again to Cabinet, eventually answering regular members. Cabinet members have extra staff to handle their workload, discretionary funds to appropriate as they see fit, and maintain a tight grip on access to departments, agencies, and information. Simple requests for data sets will often be answered by an executive summary written by departmental officials. And in the past, regular members have had to pay for and file their own, pay for it out of their own pockets and file ATIP requests to get answers from the N.W.T on legislative reviews of bills before committees. Mr. Speaker, the House has paramount responsibility to oversee the public purse, among other duties, and paramount is ensuring the laws of the land proposed by the government reflect the will, attitudes, and aspirations of the people. Regular members need a system that functionally permits this, and our current system places barriers and challenges in the way. Regular members should not have to have their access to government information filtered through a minister's office. In the much, at least as far as the membership of this House is concerned, the much derided partisan institutions of the South, there are backbench MPs who can speak directly to deputy ministers in those governments to get information. That is something simply not permitted under our current standing procedures. The restrictions on regular members which currently exist in the operation of our consensus system ensure that they are left in the dark at the best of times, and typically only one perspective on public policy as written by government is provided to them. This is inherently contrary not only to the values of consensus, but also wholly contrary to the values of good government. Mr. Speaker, we desperately need to fix this system and make the job of regular members more consequential to the operations of government and more effective to their constituents, because they are first and foremost the reasons we are here, to represent their attitudes and not the will of government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Saul 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Cindy Margot, by Mr. Speaker, recognizing the Minister of ITI's statement a few days ago on the advancement of the N.W.T's resource potential initiatives and the number of strategies developed by this Assembly. The Petroleum Resource Strategy, alongside the proposed amendments to the N.W.T Petroleum Resources Act and the Oil and Gas Operations Act, have been efforts by this Assembly to increase our competitiveness comparative to other jurisdictions and promote increased investment in the N.W.T oil and gas exploration production, while enhancing transparency and public accountability. This Assembly has been working to create an environment where investors can be confident in and proceed with energy and infrastructure projects throughout the territory. And it's this confidence that will benefit the economic growth and prosperity in regions such as the Sahtu. Mr. Speaker, we also must continue to support and identify opportunities for our energy resources to be developed locally to reduce the cost of living, displace diesel for a cleaner environment, and create good long-term jobs in this regard. We all have a role to play as we adapt to the realities of climate change and transition to a stronger, healthy economy, less reliant on fossil fuels, while benefiting all residents and the small communities and large urban centers as well. I also appreciate the key infrastructure investments in the Mackenzie Valley Highway will help increase the viability of resource development in the Sahtu and support advancements in our territory. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Massey. member statements like no that such as who the ne carry on the amik anyone le what the yek anyone member for Satu no doubt such no again.
Merci, Mr. Speaker, merci, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, the idle time we have can be used constructively through strategic planning and engagement that include all N.W.T stakeholders. It's through these collaborative processes that the N.W.T will create an environment for responsible resource development. Our post-devolution engagement on legislation modernization is in the process. And as our term draws near, it allows all members an opportunity to reflect on the progress and successes achieved. Soon we will be reviewing over 200 mandate commitments that were developed collaboratively at the beginning of the 18th Assembly. Although I look forward to the final report along with the transition report for the next Assembly, I would be remiss not to highlight the successes of this Assembly has made in key energy and infrastructure projects. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, we should all ensure that with our remaining time, we will continue to look for opportunities to collaborate and create positive change for the people of the Northwest Territories. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Acknowledgments. Oral question. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier I spoke about marine transportation services, and my questions are for the Minister of Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, my first question is, what is MTS doing to plan for this and future seasons to ensure that they don't run into same issues as we did last year? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned in the House here the other day about some of the conditions that we're working on here to make sure we don't get into the same situation as we did last year with the shipping season. We've moved our schedule forward, as I mentioned in this House, and I encourage all members that have communities that participate or use MTS to inform their residents along with what we're trying to do along our communications line to inform them that we've moved our sailing schedule up. Of course, that is conditioned, as I said again, on a number of conditions. It's going to be on the ice conditions on Great Slave Lake. It's going to be on the conditions of the ice going down the Mackenzie River. We're a little concerned about the low water levels. Coast Guard has to put their buoys in again, and a lot of it is conditional too as well. We're working with the fuel supplier that supplies the government of the Northwest Territories for our annual summer resupply, and as maybe many members in the House don't know, we hired an extra person with our communications process through our customer service representatives. So these are some of the initiatives that we've taken to hope alleviate the situation that happened last year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Cassie, member in N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the response from the Minister. It looks like we have a lot of lessons to learn as we move ahead, as seeing this is all very new to the government. Mr. Speaker, my second question to the Ministers, are the bulk fuel prices being done, and will they reduce the price of gas for petroleum products for Arctic residents? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All our bulk fuel is purchased in the summer. As I've said, that's our normal practice for the marine summer resupply. The final price of gasoline and other fuels is based on the cost of fuel and the cost of shipment to each community. The changes in sale prices are based on these costs, and we won't know what those prices are going to be typically till the end of fall until we gather all this information. And also on the member's first note too, there's another effort that we're doing to help address the situation is MTS plans to mobilize and stage all fuel and dry cargo in the N.W.T region of Tuktoyaktuk early in the season too. So that's one of the things that we're looking at adjusting our schedule. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Tuttle Cassie, member in the N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that. It's good to hear. It gives MTS a little bit of reaction time to some of the issues and some of the conditions up in the Arctic along the Beaufort Sea. Mr. Speaker, my third question is, have there been any planning studies done using Tuktoyaktuk as a staging point for future shipping, not just to the N.W.T communities, but to other communities, say in Alaska and as well in Nunavut? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Infrastructure is applied for funding through CANNOR, and what we're doing is the application is a study to examine economic, employment, and community development opportunities induced by potential investment and improvements in the marine assets and supporting infrastructure to 6 communities of the Bodell and the Inuit settlement region. The study will examine and recommend a future role for Tuktoyaktuk as a straightforward staging location for cargo and fuel to support marine resupply of and through the Western Arctic. We're contemplating that these improvements will mitigate the risk of any future marine resupply in the area. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nundida Cassie, member in the N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's good to hear that, I think we've gone a long ways since this time last year as far as MTS goes and the planning for shipping in the Arctic communities. And it's great to see that the minister's working with federal ministers on this as well, Mr. Speaker. That's good news. I commend the minister for that. Mr. Speaker, my final questions are there any infrastructure investments planned to improve shipping in Arctic coastal communities in the N.W.T? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said, the money we applied for CANNOR will actually give us some pinpoint ideas of what we need to do around that. But one of the big things I think that we're doing this year is, this House knows, is that we've went out and secured the money to purchase 4 double-hull barges that'll help do the resupply in these communities. And the procurement process for building these is underway right now. And we're anticipating, all goes well, that we'll have delivery of these by August of 2020. And this is going to help with the existing fleet of the 2 double-hull barges that we already have. So we'll have 6 double-hull barges. And as I said in this House before, when I've talked about this is going to help us, instead of making 2 trips to some of these communities, or all of these communities, we'd be able to do the resupply based on 1 trip to each community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Canada, member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday afternoon, the highway between High Level and Enterprise was closed because of a fire that is straddling the highway by Steen River. Not only has this stranded some residents, but the majority of foods and goods that come into the territory travel along that highway. And that's because it's the most economical route. So if all the truck traffic needs to be routed through BC and up to Liard Highway, you can be assured that the price of everything is going to go up for not just residents, but for businesses and for the N.W.T. And depending on how long this is closed, it could cause disruptions to the construction season as well. So my first question for the Minister of Infrastructure is, does the N.W.T know how long this stretch of highway will be closed? And if not, what's the department doing to keep the public informed about the closure in a timely manner, and where can people find that information? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, not at this time. We don't know how long the highway is going to be closed. We're in constant contact and communication with our Alberta counterparts on this issue. We know this is going to significantly impact the residents of Northwest Territories if this is ongoing for a considerable long time. I even mentioned to some of the people last night at the event that the Premier and I were at that they don't think about it, but if this road's closed for any significant amount of time, the residents in the South Slave that are on the road system that are impacted by food delivery and fuel delivery and stuff could be significant. So we're in constant contact with the Alberta counterparts, as I said. For residents of the N.W.T that are listening today and then want to read Hansard, we have our N.W.T infrastructure website that's going to be posting constant updates on that. We have the infrastructure Twitter page that we'll be using, and we also have variable digital sign messaging signs that are going to be on the highway system if they're already out there, I believe. And we're working with different media outlets across the Northwest Territories to get this information out there in a timely manner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Cassie, member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I remember a few years ago I was heading back up north and there was a fire by Zama, and we were escorted through in the nighttime like a convoy. So is the N.W.T working with the government of Alberta to have vehicles escorted through the fire zone to avoid disruption to the supply of food, fuel, materials, and so on? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The short answer is no. The reason for that is based on the information that we're getting out of the Alberta Department of ENR, whatever their title is in Alberta. This fire is out of control at the present time. It's not safe to be able to escort people through there, and they got to get a better understanding of the fire's behavior. And we will be working, as I said, very closely with these people to get a better understanding when this will be able to be done. All I know is today we have north winds down there again, and the fire is right along the side of the highway, and it's plus 30 in the region, and that's going to remain closed for the short time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Oral question, Tada Cassie member, Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, this happened about less than 24 hours ago, I believe the closure was, and so there were some people who were on their way up north, some people headed south, and I'm not sure what the fuel situation is where these people were stopped, if they've all turned around and gone home, but are there motorists who are stranded at either end, and if so, are there services being provided to them? Just basic things like access to washrooms and water and fuel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, we have put washroom facilities at the barricade already. The Department of Infrastructure is also in talks with the Hamlet of Enterprise to see if we can use some of their existing infrastructure, like the senior center, as a rallying point for these people. The motorists are also being directed into the community of Hay River to use their facilities as well. And as I said, we're in constant communication with the Alberta government and trying to do what we can to for if there's any questions that need to be answered for people stuck on the other side. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Oral question, Nudere Cassie member, Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think every day so far during the sitting we've heard either statements or questions about marine resupply, and that's because of what happened last season. People are a little worried about whether or not they're going to get their goods, their fuel, their food on the barges. And so how long before this disruption causes problems with the resupply? Because I assume that the rail line has also been shut down, and I'm not quite sure, but that's how most of the fuel comes into the territory. So can the minister give us some insight on that? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, the rail traffic has been affected, particularly around the high-level fire, not even the new fire that's around the Steen River area. There's been no rail traffic for over a week already. Infrastructure has been in conversation with CN Rail. They have been out there and checked out their asset. They're inspecting it and then doing a weight test on the rail tracks and bridges to make sure everything is copacetic once they were able to open back up. And as today, none of their infrastructure has actually been affected by the railroad, but we are continuing to work with CN and stay abreast of the situation and keep residents informed when, this House informed, I guess, when the railroad would be opened back up so they can get the fuel supply back north. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Oral question, Canyon, the member Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I had an opportunity to ask the Minister of Health and Social Services some questions regarding foster parents, and I have some follow-up questions for him today. Mr. Speaker, I believe people who open their homes for our youth are amazing and kind-hearted people. How does the Department and the N.W.T Health and Social Services Authority, show appreciation to the foster parents annually? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, foster parents make a significant difference in the lives of children and youth, and their efforts and commitment really needs to be recognized and supported and celebrated. Mr. Speaker, we do that as a government. We do support the Foster Family Coalition, who does take significant efforts to do this as well. Mr. Speaker, each year we take time to celebrate the important contributions that the foster families make in the lives of the children and youth within the Northwest Territories. For example, over the years, there has been a variety of events to help honor and celebrate the foster families in individual communities led by regional offices in those communities. Each community and region often has their own way of celebrating. In some regions, they host breakfast, they have dinners or lunches, they provide small gifts of gratitude. The Foster Family Coalition has been really fantastic in supporting the foster families, and they assist by sending, they help us by actually getting letters out to the foster families thanking them for their service across the Northwest Territories. They also host a number of different functions throughout the year. I've had the honor of attending a couple different dinners and events that the Foster Family Coalition has put on for foster families, where I've had the opportunity to thank foster families directly for all that they do. And we also take every opportunity like this to really thank the foster families throughout the Northwest Territories for their incredible work. So there's a lot of different things we do. There is not one set program of gratitude or acknowledgement, but we take every opportunity. We work with the Foster Family Coalition, who is really the lead on this, and we support them in their efforts to congratulate and thank our foster families as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question like today, Council Member Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that's great to hear. Again, I'm looking at the territories and I'm trying to see how we help, recognize our foster parents, and it's great that the coalition does that, but sometimes the coalitions don't exist in some of these smaller communities that I'm aware of. So has the department looked at recognizing these foster parents, especially on Mother's Day, Father's Day, like even a small gift, like a box of chocolates or a card? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Foster Family Coalition of the Northwest Territories is a territorial NGO, and they reach out to all communities throughout the Northwest Territories. We haven't targeted something like Mother's Day or Father's Day. We have actually targeted our formal appreciation of foster parents to communication and other activities actually surrendered around Foster Family Week. There is actually a national week set up for this. So we do that rather than looking at Mother's Day or Father's Day. The celebration of foster caregivers occurs both at a national and a territorial level every year. We know that we need to look at further opportunities, Mr. Speaker, and we recognize and appreciate everything that foster parents do. And we will certainly work with the Foster Family Coalition to find ways to better support them. There's lots of opportunities for us to do this. We have a good relationship with the Foster Family Coalition, and we will certainly continue to have dialogue around this issue to make sure that our foster families are really getting the support and appreciation that they deserve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, today, Council Member Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the response from the Minister, and again, Mother's Day, Father's Day, just a small appreciation for the great work that these folks do. And again, I think they're the most amazing people that open their own homes to look after our youth in difficult times. So does the department budget for such activities in their yearly budget? And when you talk about the coalition, do we give them money to help them provide this kind of service? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there isn't a budget line referred to as foster family appreciation or foster family gratitude, but there is specific budget within each of the regional offices of the Territorial Authority specific for supporting foster families, Foster Family Coalition. And within those budgets, the authorities, the three authorities and the regional operations are able to support foster care appreciation activities and initiatives. So although there isn't a specific line, the dollars that they have available can be and are used to provide appreciation and gratitude to those that are doing this incredibly important work throughout the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Council Member Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I'd like to thank the Minister for his answers here today. I guess I'm trying to understand the budgeting process there and getting it out there. So can the Minister, provide us information on how much money is allocated for foster caring? Maybe not here today, but, provide it to us later on. So we can have a better understanding of the money that's put into this, because, we see a shortfall in it, and maybe it's something that we need to look at to help, improve our foster carers out there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the member knows, any time that any of the departments wish to put additional money into any of our programs and services, we have to build a business case that has evidence to suggest that it's necessary. We're always looking at our programs to see if more money is needed. And to that end, we actually did significantly increase the allocation for families through the foster family care program. The per diems have increased significantly about a year and a half ago. That information was brought forward in this assembly. It was discussed. I can't remember off the top of my head what the budget is for foster families here in the Northwest Territories, but I will commit to getting the member that information. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, County, the member, Yellowknife Centre.
Mr. Speaker, appreciate the Minister of Health and Social Services talking about Seniors Month starting in just a couple of days. Although the department provides many valuable services to seniors, there is a gap here in Yellowknife because there is no adult day program. It closed about 2.5 years ago, and I ask each session what's happening with it. So with that, I wonder if the Minister could give us an update on the status of the adult day program for Yellowknife. Thank you.
Let's see. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the members' continued commitment and dedication to this particular program and the important work that it has done in the past and the important work that we need to continue to do. I did have an opportunity to meet with the member earlier in May, where we had an opportunity to discuss the current status. Last session, I indicated that I would direct the department to move quickly to put in a day program. And they did proceed with that work, but then they came back to me after they had an opportunity to talk to the other stakeholders. And the stakeholders raised a good point that before we design a program, we should really talk to the clients who are utilizing the program to make sure that the program we make actually suits their needs. It's been great that members in this House, myself included, have been talking about how important it is, but we hadn't actually had that conversation. So I withdrew from aggressively pushing it to changing the direction slightly and asking the authority and the department to work with a steering committee that has been established to reach out to the residents in Yellowknife to find out exactly what they want so that what we design meets their needs. That work is currently underway. They're reaching out to seniors throughout the community to figure out what exactly they'd like an adult day program to look like. And we're hoping to have all that work done and a program designed by the fall of this year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Cassie, member, Yellowknife Centre.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I understand this correctly, it was the stakeholders who told the minister to put the brakes on this while he did an assessment of needs. Do I have that correctly? Thank you.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
No, Mr. Speaker, that's not what I said. I said the stakeholders indicated that it would be valuable to do that work, that it would be important to actually hear what the resident says as opposed to, us in this chamber assuming we actually know without talking to the clients or to the residents. And at that time, I realized that it's important that we get their voice, we get their input, we design programs to meet the needs of people as opposed to meeting the needs of the individuals in this House, and I directed them to take that new direction at that time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Cassie, member, Yellowknife Centre.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the thing that I find most difficult to understand is 2.5 years after the day program closed, the minister is now looking at an assessment of what the needs are. This, to me, does not indicate a real priority to address this area. Why has it taken so long to get to the point of assessing needs? Thank you.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Mr. Speaker, the member might want to go back and review Hansard for the last 2.5 years. She has certainly brought this up a number of times, and it is a priority. The member should not be blind to the fact that, based on her recommendations, her encouragement in this House, we did go for an RFP. We had no applicants. We went out for another RFP. We had no applicants. We reached out to some stakeholders. There was some indication of a desire to work together. We were going through that process when in October or January, February this year, the member said we really need to make progress. I made a commitment to actually moving forward with a program at that time. At that time, when we started to move out with a program, the stakeholders said, whoa, 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 we really need to do this assessment. I respect what our stakeholders are telling us, and I made the direction to the department at that time to reach out to users, not just stakeholders, and get that work done, which is what we're doing. We'll have it done in the fall, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, non-data Council Member Yellowknife Center.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a botch. This assessment should have been done before the RFP went out. On what basis was the RFP issued in the first place, if not to describe the needs that the bidder was supposed to work on? So I fail to understand how doing an assessment at this point is the next logical step. It should have been done years ago. So now the minister is saying to us, not only will it be done now, the whole program will be implemented and designed within the next 4 months. Mr. Speaker, I've been here long enough to think that that's unlikely. What confidence can the minister give us that that will happen? Thank you.
Let's see. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member has been involved in this for a while. There was a report done after the original program shut down by Avens. I've heard the member in this House say that we need to duplicate that program with a few amendments that were identified in that report. That's what we moved forward in the RFP. That's what the member and others encouraged me to do. I did as the member suggested. It didn't prove to have any value because nobody applied on the RFP. We went to some stakeholders, got a few amendments on how we thought people wanted us to go out. Once again, potential proponents. It also bore no fruit, Mr. Speaker. Then we went to other stakeholders who hadn't expressed interest, and we started to get their input. This is based on the wishes of the member who has continually raised this issue. We have done what the member has asked us to do, and we'll continue to make sure that this program is effective. On the last round, I said we are going to move, we're going to design something. At that point, the stakeholders, our partners, the people who want to be part of the solution said, before we do that, we should really talk to our clients to figure out exactly what it is they want, as opposed to what has been delivered in the past, which did not work, which was in the RFP, which was built on a report that was prepared based on what had previously been done, which did involve some input from stakeholders. So the member is obviously appears to be upset that we're not making progress. We have been responsive to the member. I'm as frustrated as she is that it's not done, but the reality is, if we're going to do it, we need to do it right, and we're getting it done, Mr. Speaker.
Let's see. Oral question, Academy, the member of Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oh, I'm sorry.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Now for something completely different. 2 days ago, the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources tabled an annual report under the Environmental Rights Act that covered 15 years. Can the Minister explain why this annual report covers 15 years when there is a statutory requirement to report every year to this Assembly? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've not, members correct, we've not tabled one since 2002, 2003, and this was primarily due to inactivity under the ERA. In the future, however, reports will be tabled on an annual basis, regardless of whether there or not there was any activities conducted under the ERA. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Akira Council Member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. From my calculations, in the 28 years since the Environmental Rights Act has been passed, there's been 3 requests for investigations into the release or potential release of contaminants into the natural environment. Only one of the 3 requests for investigation was accepted, and that happened back in 1991. Can the Minister confirm those numbers on investigations under the Environmental Rights Act? 3 requests and only 1 actual investigation in 28 years. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my understanding is that there was 4 requests for investigations. For 3 of the requests, it was determined that the appropriate permits and licenses were in place, therefore the investigations were declined. In the 4th request, a full investigation was undertaken and recommendations were made. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Tada Council Member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I'd like to thank the Minister for correcting the numbers there. I was one of the 2 people that filed that, the one that was actually accepted in 1991, so I know a little bit about that. There are some other reporting requirements under the Environmental Rights Act set out in Section 8 that were not covered in the tabled report. The annual report is also supposed to cover all prosecutions commenced by individual N.W.T. residents for environmental offenses, all court actions commenced by individual N.W.T. residents to protect the environment, and the use of any money received as a result of the court actions, and all convictions for offenses as a result of protecting whistleblowers. I'm not aware of any of these provisions of the Environmental Rights Act ever being used in the last 28 years, but will the minister table a report on these matters in this House? Must see, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as required under Section 8 of the ERA, the annual report tabled May 27, 2019, stated that no applications, investigations, prosecutions, or action had been undertaken between the reporting periods 2003, 2004, and 2018-19, other than one application for an investigation in 2013-14. As there were no prosecutions, there was no disposition of money or any convictions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question. No data Cassie member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I see that in the report. Maybe in future reports are going to be a little bit clear about the reporting under each of the subsections in Section 8 of the Environmental Rights Act. But so I think the Minister, though, has made my point here. Given the issues of late reporting by the Minister under the Environmental Rights Act and the lack of use of the rights established under this legislation, what is the Minister doing to promote environmental rights in the Northwest Territories? Must see, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the member is currently aware, amendments to the Environmental Rights Act have been proposed to make it easier to make an application for an investigation. Bill 39 is currently undergoing review by Standing Committee on Economic Development and the Environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Oral question, County, the member Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are to the Minister of Finance. The GWT's affirmative action policy dates back at least as far back as 1989, when it succeeded the Native Employment Policy. It was meant to even the playing field for Aboriginal people by giving us priority hiring opportunities when seeking employment with the GWT. This was done out of a recognition that many Aboriginal people have faced systemic and other barriers to getting a good education and also when applying for a job. My question is, why has the affirmative action policy not been updated in the last 30 years? What is preventing the GWT from getting this done? Masi.
Masi. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I for one have seen some of the benefits in my riding of the results of affirmative action, and I do support it. If it hasn't been reviewed for a while, I think there's an opportunity to do a review, but it has reached some of the goals that it intended to. I think there's across government-wide, we have about, I think member pointed out before, we've got over 1,533 affirmative action employees, and outside the capital we have about 1,100, so it's about 46% of our workforce outside the capital are RP1 candidates, getting closer to the 50%, and I think as our people start to be more and more educated and get into some of these positions, I think we're going to see those numbers rise. I'm sure if you go into community by community, you'll probably see a higher percentage of Indigenous Aboriginal employees within the communities themselves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, the Kidare Cassie member Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think the Minister has stated that some aspects of the policy is working, but I didn't hear a commitment. Will the Minister commit to having his department bring forward innovative ideas for improving Aboriginal employment rights? As an example, what about an Aboriginal employee advocate who is tasked to work with management to assist interested Aboriginal employees seeking employment with the GWT? Masi.
Masi. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if we have an actual advocate within the department. I'm sure a number of our staff people are working with trying to improve the percentages across Northwest Territories, but I do know that we have a number of innovative or new initiatives that we've been bringing forward. We have one, and I spoke to it yesterday, where we would like to work with some of the Indigenous governments, take on some of their employees, provide them an opportunity to build some capacity, then they go back and serve the people that they represent. So there's opportunities. I do believe that we have a lot of opportunities within the government system to help those that want to move through the system. Again, I've always been a firm believer in trying to improve the numbers, and I think we've seen the numbers improve, and I'm confident we've seen the numbers improving. But my biggest thing is I want to see the move through the system based on merit. And we have a lot of really good people out there that are going through the system based on what they bring to the table, because I wouldn't want to put somebody in a position because they're a P1 candidate just to fill a quota and have them fail. It doesn't do us any good. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question. Tada Council Member Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my other question is, when the performance of deputy ministers is reviewed, are they graded on how successful they have been in reaching the Aboriginal employment targets the policy is designed to reach? Merci.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Premier is responsible for the discussions with the Deputy, but I would assume that there's a number of goals that deputies have to achieve as part of their performance, and I do know that within the departments that I had, I know there's some opportunities in there for the deputies to try and improve the workforce and come up with new initiatives to improve the workforce. Again, I think we're getting there. I really think we're getting there, and I believe that in the future there's going to be more and more representative Indigenous P1 representatives within the GNWT, but they'll get there based on merit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question. Nundere Council Member Decho.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's pretty clear that, yes, indeed, there should be a system to help Indigenous people, and I think the Minister clearly stated that it should be based on merit, and I agree with that. Is it a standard employment practice that anyone applying for a GNWT job, anyone, must first write a written test? Are exceptions being made for Aboriginal people applying for jobs, especially in areas such as labor, where writing is not a required skill? For example, could your Aboriginal language be used? Merci.
Oral question. Sorry, Minister of Finance.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I understand that there are some tests that applicants have to take. Like everyone else, they do the test to see if they qualify for the position, and if they qualify for a position, and on top of being a P1 candidate, then it would help them get to the next stage. And I've seen cases where a number of Aboriginal people that were working within the system and doing some quality work, but didn't quite meet some of the qualifications that were required. And I think we've taken some steps to correct that. And I've seen cases, I've heard of cases where people were being brought in to do a job that the applicant in the same office who's been doing it for a while was not qualified to do. So who was tasked with training the new person coming in? The applicant that wasn't qualified to do the job. Thankfully, things work out at the end that two applicants, the two people in the office did move into managerial positions because they'd been doing that work for a long time, but based on the paper qualifications, they didn't really have them. And I think that was a good case of the applicants and our people moving through the system based on their ability to do the job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Canada Member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, follow up to my member's statement. I have a couple of questions for the Minister of Housing, responsible for housing. I'd like to ask the Minister, Are we on schedule for the completion date of the Elders Home in Fort McPherson? Thank you, Mrs. Speaker.
Massey. Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for his member statement and recognizing that our elders are important. The continuing of culture and traditions and allowing our elders to live in an area where they can continue practicing and teaching our youth their cultures and traditions is very important. We are expecting to have a completion this summer, sometime in June. I don't have an exact date, but I will keep the member as well as the residents and the elders updated so that we know when we can do the move-in. And just want to thank the community for their patience. I know this was a project that was a little bit complicated and we had to deal with it, so I just want to thank the member for bringing this up, and that we will keep the member updated so that he can keep his residents and elders updated as well. And I don't have an exact date right now, but we are looking sometime in June. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'll see. All question Akira Cassie member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mrs. Speaker. Mrs. Speaker, that's good that we're on track here. When does the department plan to have their grand opening? Thank you, Mrs. Speaker.
I'll see. Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once we have a firm date, we will let the member know, as well as community leaders know that we will be opening it. One thing that I do want to mention that is with the design that we did fix and change up, there has been a design for improved accessibility, high energy efficiency, as well as having a space for health and wellness programming. And once we do have a firm date for the opening, as I mentioned, we will have the elders, the community, and the leadership know when that day is. And as usual, the member knows, and members around the table know, McPherson does really do a good job when we celebrate things as such. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mrs. Speaker. Mrs. Speaker, we know we're going to finish the building in June, so when will the department hire a caretaker? That way that position is in place before the elders move in. Thank you, Mrs. Speaker.
Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned, we're looking to open it next month. We're hoping that we'll have elders into the 8 units and have a caretaker in place. We will have to go through the regular process, and as tradition, right? That we do have our people taking care of our people, and as the member noted in his member statement, that our elders are very important, and that we will have somebody capable to take that position on. And as we progress through the opening and working with the seniors complex, we will keep the member apprised, as well as the leadership in the community of Fort McPherson. Thank you.
Merci. All question County, the member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. As I mentioned in my member statement, there's great potential for a polytechnic university to enhance our educational system, our economy, and our society in general. And so, Mr. Speaker, Arctic research and knowledge has an increasing profile in Canada and around the world. And in fact, last year, the federal government and government of Quebec announced more than $53 million in funding for new campus of the Institut Nordique de Quebec that will have a focus on Arctic research. So I'd like to ask the minister, has the minister begun any, call it lobbying, to the federal government for support for the development of the Polytechnic University. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As for the term lobbying, direct lobbying to build our Polytechnic University, at this point we have not. I know that the federal government is working with us. They just gave us $4 million, I believe, for the Centre for Mining and Industry in Fort Smith that was recently opened that I attended just a couple months ago. There also, word on the street is that they're actually looking at polytechnic or post-secondary universities in the north all over, so we're trying to get in on that team to find out what they're doing, what their interests are. Once we have an implementation plan developed and we've decided what types of canvas, student supports, etc. that we need, at that point when we have a concrete ask, we'll be approaching the federal government with an ask. I'm very hopeful. I know that they are looking at us, and I also know that they have supported not only Quebec but also the Yukon with their post-secondary. So we're in line, we're watching them closely, and we're hoping they're listening today. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Akita Cassie, member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that update. And I appreciate that it is an election year, and so I would ask that the Minister and the government keeps the pressure on. Mr. Speaker, in February, the Minister updated the Assembly on post-secondary development, referring particularly to a public consultation process to gather input of the needs of our post-secondary system and the establishment of the Public Advisory Board. So I'd like to ask the Minister, can the Minister update the Assembly on progress in these areas? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
So thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, actually we're going to be presenting to Standing Committee as well on June 5th, so I'm going to give a little bit of heads up to what we're presenting on June 5th, I suppose. We've completed the survey. We've gone across the Northwest Territories. We've reached actually almost 750 surveys. I don't have the number on hand. We'll present to Standing Committee. We did a real focus on youth, 29 and under, which I'm very happy to report that we've actually been very successful in getting those voices. So with that, we're still breaking down what the vision will be. That process is still ongoing. Not only the vision, but the goals, which will become our framework. So we're doing that process, and the Advisory Council is really important. That will actually support the Associate Deputy Minister of Post-Secondary Renewal to define where he's going with the courses and also to do the evaluation. So I know that the Associate Deputy Minister has already approached some universities, colleges throughout Canada, really looking for people with a strength in Polytechnic to actually help us, mentor us through. And we just did a draft terms of reference for the Advisory Committee that will be shared once we're finalized with Standing Committee and then put out, but we're in the process of doing that currently. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Oral question, Tada Cassie, member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that update. That's much appreciated, and we certainly look forward to the presentation on June 5th. Mr. Speaker, in my statement, I spoke about the benefits of a Made in the North curriculum. Building on the curriculum that's been taught at Aurora College for many years, what does the Minister envision for the new, call it directions, that the curriculum of a Polytechnic University might take on? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we've often heard it all along saying we need to get this right. With our Polytechnic, we need to get this right. This isn't going to be something that's done too fast. So the first thing was developing our vision, trying to find out what are our strengths, what programs should we be done. One of the critiques that was in the Aurora College Foundational Report is we try to do too much for everyone. And sometimes when you try to too much, like over 200 mandate questions areas, you don't get enough done to address them all. You get spread too thin. So we are trying to figure out what our specialization should be, and my direction has been all along from the beginning. I said that when I first came into the Assembly. I have not changed my stance. I am huge on accreditation. Accreditation means best practices. So whatever our specializations will be defined, I want accredited programming, programming that our students can take their qualifications and go throughout Canada, internationally, to be able to provide their skills throughout. So that is my direction, is that the curriculum be based on best practices and that we work towards accrediting all of our programming at our Polytechnic University. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Nun dere kasi oral questions on member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you again to the Minister for that reply. And I like her enthusiasm and definitely the excitement that she has about accreditation. And in particular, she mentioned about accreditation that could be, awarded to those not just in the North, but outside of the North, possibly outside of Canada. So our post-secondary strategy must be central to provide better services and opportunities for our own young people, but a further advantage of a polytechnic university will be its ability to attract people from outside the North. So I'd like to ask the Minister, what does the Minister envision in a strategy for attracting interest and participation from around Canada and other parts of the world? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I was traveling to the three communities 3 or 4 times, I'd heard from staff and from students, etc., that they want to have great programming and that we need to have programming for Northern students. People were a little bit concerned about national and international students, but it's a good thing. The reality is that our numbers in the Northwest Territories will make it challenging if we didn't look outside of the Northwest Territories. But I want to emphasize the post-secondary that we provide in the Northwest Territories has to be for Northern people, based on Northern needs and specializing in Northern strengths. That will define who we become, the courses that we offer. No sense doing everything, like I had said before, define what our strengths are. Once that is done, and those programs are actually developed so that they're based on best practices, that they're quality programming, then at that point we need to do a serious student enrollment management plan that we actually look at not only getting students from the Northwest Territories, gauging them, keeping them in courses, but also looking nationally and internationally, because not only is it we need to promote what we have the strengths of the Northwest Territories, but we also need the numbers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral questions. The member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recently I've been hearing rumors and concerns about the MTS fuel resupply from last year. It is my understanding some of last year's fuel supply that was delivered to the shipyard in Hay River was apparently bad fuel. I'd like to ask the Minister of Infrastructure if he can tell us what happened in this situation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, this is true. Some of the fuel that was supplied last year did not meet the specification required by infrastructure. This I do know because we had to reject it and it had to be returned to the refinery at the supplier's expense. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nakira Kasi member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister whose responsibility was it for the bad fuel and that was supplied to the communities? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's the supplier's responsibility to meet the terms and conditions of the contract, and then within that contract is supplying fuel with the appropriate specifications. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Tado Kasi member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in light of the fuel supplier's responsibility in providing fuel that did not meet the specifications required by the department, I'd like to ask the Minister what sort of recourse is available. Will the N.W.T be able to be reimbursed for the cost of the fuel and for sending it back? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Infrastructure did not pay for any off-spec fuel that we received, and the supplier arranged for the recovery of the off-spec specification fuel at their own expense and took it back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nundira Kasi member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the the Minister for providing this information and clearing up some of the concerns and issues that I've been hearing. Finally, given the importance of fuel supplies to communities, what lessons has the Minister learned from this experience to help avoid a similar case in the future? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Infrastructure, due to what happened last year, has actually asked the supplier to avoid these issues going forward by asking them to increase their inspection of their fuel testing regime before the fuel is delivered to us. So we've been working with them on that and asked them to do that. We will continue to independently test the fuel received from our supplier to ensure it meets our required specifications. The department has also initiated a delivery risk management initiative that will involve staging 1 year's consumption volume of fuel and surplus capacities at NCPC's tank farms in Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk. A plan is in place to establish a strategic reserve of fuel during this year's shipping resupply. So that's some of the stuff that we've worked on from last year's lessons. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, the member Frame Lake.
President, my questions are for the Minister of Infrastructure. In my statement earlier today, I itemized some reports about reimagining the design of a new or redeveloped visitor center here in Yellowknife, the former Northern Frontier Visitors Center. I point out the Minister's statements about that redesigns were being commissioned in 2017, and that they've been recently, there's a recent RFP or something again to do more designs. So before we go out for this new call for designs, can the Minister explain what he intends to do with the first two sets of designs? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Normally I credit the member for doing his homework, but actually there was 3 designs actually we received on this. So I'm just teasing him. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anyway, we've received 3 concept designs as part of this planning process, and through that, we want to go to the next step to develop a schematic design over the summer in 2019. But this is going to largely depend on some of the technical work that has been recently wrapped up on this building, and we're waiting to hear back on these geotechnical and structural reports. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for correcting my notes here. We've got 3 sets, a lot of designs to work with then. But it looks like we're going to be going out for some more. So when is a decision actually going to finally be made about either resurrecting the current building or knocking it down? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad the member asked the question that way, because as I said, this geotechnical report and structural engineering review was conducted again this year. We had the original one to it. We went out and did the work to stabilize the building. We've done a couple things since then to make sure the building doesn't get too out of whack. We already know that it never met the inspection to be able to have people in there. We went out to the design concept, we got them back, but before we push that any further, we got to see what these reports come back and say about what can be done with this building. My concern is it going to be to a point of non-repair? Do we have to knock this thing down? And I think the reports that we're going to get are going to give us a little better idea of what's going on, but from some of the discussions I've had with my department, I would say things are not looking very well on saving this building. Just to get that out there, I think it's going to look like it's in a condition that could be very expensive to fix this thing up, but I got to wait till that report hits my desk here in the next coming weeks, and then we're going to have to update this house on what we're going to do with this building moving forward. And I don't want to get too deep into long-term plans until we know if this thing's even viable to fix. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for sharing that information. I hope he'd be willing to share maybe a summary of the geotechnical report with myself. This building's in my riding when it's completed. So the other key unknown here, of course, is the role of the City of Yellowknife in promoting visitor services. So the Minister once told me that, quote, "We are working with the City of Yellowknife to determine the long-term model delivery of the Visitors Information Center, end of quote. So can the minister update us as to what sort of discussion there's been with the City of Yellowknife on providing proper visitor services here in this city? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our department and our officials are in constant contact with the City of Yellowknife on what's happening at the Visitor Information Center. One of the things that's happened since we shut down the Northern Frontier Visitor Center and moved it over to City Hall, I took a lot of questions in the House on how that's going to work out. Things with the city have been moved along quite well. One of the things that has happened since we've closed down the visitor center is actually the number of tours that actually went to the city's Tourist Information Center have almost doubled. And the department was kindly enough to actually give me those numbers. In 2018, when we shut that thing down, there was roughly 7,000 people who went to the City of Yellowknife Tourist Information Center. And I see the members writing down, it's actually 7,105. In March of 2019, this is a surprising number, and you heard me talk about this in my statement the other day, how much tourists impacted, particularly around their Aurora viewing. In Yellowknife, the number of visitors that actually visited the new center in City Hall is 12,991 people. And there hasn't been a whole bunch of noise in the Legislative Assembly about the amount of people and how the services are going. I think things are going quite well with the city on how they're handling these things. We are working with them closely. They're trying to put together an advisory committee on how they're going to see the future of this thing working out. I know our officials are talking extensively with them because we have a number of ideas that we want to work with. As you all know, we've passed a levy in this chamber so the city can actually do that stuff, and we want to see an opportunity to them of the way they look moving forward with their bylaws and how they're going to levy these funds. Maybe it's going to be to support visitors services and also the DMO, and those discussions are ongoing with the City of Yellowknife. City of Yellowknife is the biggest impacted region in the Northwest Territories based on the successes we've had around N.W.T tourism, and so we were going to continue to work with them. As I said, the building is another situation, and that's going to feed into how we work with the City of Yellowknife going forward. If we end up ripping this building down, the 19th Legislative Assembly is going to have to make a decision on how we're going to move forward, working with the City of Yellowknife based around infrastructure and what those needs are going to be, and our capital plan on that is going to be in our fiscal reality in the 19th Legislative Assembly. So there's a lot of different questions that are going to have to be answered. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question. No délai, Cassie, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that long explanation, but of what's going on. But look, the reality, of course, is that our government continues to spend more on a visitor center in Dawson, Yukon, than we do here in Yellowknife, which is the capital. The Minister trotted out some great numbers of the increases in visitation at the visitor center in the basement of City Hall. And as the Minister well knows, I helped drag him through the visitor center when we were coming back from lunch one day. Look, I think the city's doing a good job with what they've got, but they clearly don't have enough. So what is the Minister doing to set this up for the next Assembly so that we actually can make a proper investment in promoting tourism here in Yellowknife, given the huge growth in this sector that the Minister himself just talked about? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said, I'm not even going to go to my notes first here. I'm going to talk to address some of the comments that the members made. I'm the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment. I represent all residents of the Northwest Territories, not just the City of Yellowknife, not just the tourists coming to the City of Yellowknife.
Learn how.
What I don't like about the comments the member made was it's kind of us versus them, the Bow-Dell region versus Yellowknife, because of the money we've spent in Whitehorse. We're trying to address and diversify our economy across all regions of the Northwest Territories. The City of Yellowknife has clearly been the biggest benefactor of tourism in Northwest Territories, and I dare any member to stand up in this House and contradict me on that. That's not the case. We're doing it, as I've said before in this House, we're doing almost too good of a job because we're a victim of our own success. But this is what we are going to do going forward, and that was what the member's question is. Under Tourism 2020 strategy, we will invest more than $1.5 million this year in the development and delivery of funding and programming to strengthen our tourism products and capacity of our tourism operators. The growth of tourism, particularly through the life of this government, confirms that our approach of supporting and growing this sector of our economy is working. That was clearly by the numbers I said in the House yesterday. As members may be aware, we are about to begin the process of evaluation of our current 2020 strategy in the interest of developing a follow-up strategy and building on the success that we have seen. Our process will include engagement with tourism stakeholders and operators and will help us to identify the projects and priorities not just for Yellowknife, but for the full territory. I look forward to having the members' contributions to this process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. With that, time for oral question has expired. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's opening address. Replies to Commissioner's opening address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports of Standing Special Committee. Member for Camp Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to waive Rule 100(4) to have Committee Report 16-18(3) Standing Committee on Government Operations report on the review of Bill 29 and Act to amend the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act moved into Committee of the Whole for consideration later today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Members requesting unanimous consent to waive Rule 100(4) to have the Committee Report 16-18(3) moved to Committee of the Whole. Are there any nays? There are no nays. That Committee Report 18(3) bracket 3 have been moved to Committee of the Whole. Reports of Standing Special Committee. Reports of Standing Special Committee. Reports of Committee on the Review of Bills. Reports of Committee on Review of Bills. Tabling of documents. Minister of Industry, Tourism, and Investment.
I wish to table the following 3 documents entitled 2017-2018 Annual Report, Northwest Territories Agricultural Products Marketing Council, Northwest Territories Oil and Gas Annual Report 2018, and the Annual Report on the 2018-2019 N.W.T. Office of the Regulator of the Oil and Gas Operations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Tabling of documents. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document entitled Health and Social Services, Northwest Territories Health Directory 2019.
Merci. Tabling of documents. Member for Camp Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table the following document, the 2030 N.W.T. Climate Change Strategic Framework 2019-2023 Action Plan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Notices of motion. Member for Camp Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I give notice that on Tuesday, June 4th, 2019, I will move the following motion. Now, therefore, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Yellowknife North, that table document 442-18(3, 2030 N.W.T. Climate Change Strategic Framework 2019-2023 Action Plan be referred to Committee of the Whole for consideration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Notices of motion for first reading bills. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, I give notice that on Tuesday, June 4th, 2019, I will move that Bill 57, an act to amend the Employment Standards Act, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Notices of motion for first reading bills. Notices of motion for first reading bills. Motions. Motions. First reading bills. First reading bills. Second reading bills. Second reading bills. Consideration Committee of the Whole bills and other matters. Bill 29, 30, 35. Committee Report 1518. Minister's Statement 15118 and 15118.3 with Member Hay River North in a chair.
I will now call Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The committee would like to consider Committee Report 16-18 brackets 3 Standing Committee on Government Operations report on the review of Bill 29, an act to amend the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act, Bill 29, an act to amend the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act, and Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. We will consider the three documents after a brief recess. Thank you. We're not starting yet. Thanks, committee. We're not quite starting yet. We just need a few more minutes. I just wanted to shut the bells off for the sake of everyone's sanity. Thank you for your patience, committee. I will call the committee of the whole back to order. Committee, we have agreed to first consider committee report 16-18 brackets 3, Standing Committee on Government Operations report on the review of Bill 29, an act to amend the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act. I will go to the chair of the committee for opening remarks, Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak to the committee's report. I'm not going to speak at length as we read the full contents of the report into the record yesterday, and I believe that took approximately an hour and a half because it is, my understanding, the third longest report that's been produced by a committee in the history of the North, or history of this sitting at least. And it shows the tremendous amount of work that the committee did putting together their review of Bill 29, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the very hard work of staff, both committee staff and the staff of the Department of Justice did collaborating on a bill that addressed the public concerns that the committee heard, addressed the concerns that members brought forward and over the course of the review, and worked collaboratively to ensure that we have world-class access and privacy legislation. And I think I can safely say that this is one of the most progressive access and privacy regimes currently in the country. And I think we should all look towards this as fulfilling a very important part of this government's commitment to transparency and openness as a government in Canada. It is a new generation and a new age of technology, and we've seen a number of very high-profile privacy issues over the life of this government. And this legislation is going to ensure that the privacy rights and protections are in place for our citizens, and that the government can ensure it can continue to function where its own privacy is needed, but that is tempered by the public's right to know and the high standards of transparency we have set as a society and as a government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. The way we usually proceed with these reports is the chair will move as motions the recommendations within the report, and there are 2 in this report. But before we get into that, I will open up the floor to general comments on the report itself. Do we have any general comments from committee relating to the report? First, Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just want to take a minute to express my appreciation to the committee and the Legislative Assembly staff for the work that they've done on this bill. I know that they have spent many hours and they've produced a very solid result, and I think that all of us in the N.W.T should be appreciative of that fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I'm not a member, I'm an alternate on the GovOps committee, and I want to sincerely thank all the committee members for their very hard work in putting this together. I sat in on all of the discussions here in Yellowknife, and this is a great report. This is why we're here as legislators, to do this kind of work. Very significant improvements have been made to the bill, but I do want to particularly recognize a few individuals for the work that they did on this whole process. I want to congratulate the chair of the committee, Mr. Testart, for stick handling this through the committee. It's a very complicated piece of legislation. A lot of issues were at play, but I want to congratulate him on his chairing skills and getting this piece of work done. A lot of the staff behind the scenes deserve some recognition, but I'll have to leave that for now. But there was a lot of very hard work by our staff. I also want to recognize the work of the Information and Privacy Commissioner, who provided a lot of feedback, very valuable feedback that was incorporated into this bill. And I think her work in particular has made it a much better piece of legislation. This is the first time that this legislation has ever gone through a comprehensive review. And we made this a mandate priority. We all did in this House. It's a very important piece of legislation, and I want to thank the Minister of Justice as well and his staff for leading that effort. I've got a strong personal interest in this matter as well, because I've used access to information for many years at the federal level. I was involved with former or MLA at the time, Sam Gargan and John Vertes, in drafting the original bill back in about 1994. So this has really come a long, long way. And I've become more familiar with the N.W.T process since I became an MLA, because I've had occasion to use this, the N.W.T process now, trying to get documents that I had hoped to get out of ministers. But this is a strong piece of legislation now, and I'm happy to support it. And I want to recognize everyone's work on getting us to where I think it needs to be. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this Assembly recommends that the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs, working with the Department of Justice, develop a detailed and costed plan to guide the implementation of the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act for municipalities, and further, that the plan identify 1, timelines for the inclusion of different categories of municipalities in the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act regulations, 2, the resources needed by each municipal government to comply with the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act to ensure 3, ensure adequate funding for initial implementation and ongoing operational requirements, along with 4, any other significant considerations is determined through consultation on development of the plan. And furthermore, that before being finalized, the plan be provided in draft so that input may be obtained from the appropriate standing committee, the N.W.T Association of Communities, and the local government administrators of the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. There is a motion on the floor. The motion is being distributed. There's some hiccups with distribution, but we're working on it. It's a 2-page motion. I'll wait until everyone has both pages before we begin speaking to the motion. To the motion, Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in virtually every community organization that came forward, including the emergency responders, first responders who work in emergency services in the communities which the committee consulted, the number one concern was ensuring that, I'm getting confused with other consultations because we've been doing so many of them. Sorry, Mr. Chair. In all the community governments we spoke to, including representatives from the Northwest Territories Association of Communities, the concern has been that a new access regime that applies to municipalities will bring with it additional technology requirements, personnel requirements, operational requirements, etc., and that funding is already stretched thin to support municipal operations. So that additional cost pressures created by this legislation to be appropriately assessed by the government of the Northwest Territories before municipalities are properly brought into the Act. I should note that the Act it creates the possibility that municipalities will be brought under ATIP, but it is to be determined on the schedule set by regulations. So not all municipalities will be subject to the Act after the Act comes into force. They'll be dealt with on a schedule moving forward, and this motion calls for a very precise, transparent and reliable process for rolling communities on to the access or into the access regime, and to ensure that a costed plan is brought forward for any additional operational requirements those municipalities need. And I think it's important that we do so to ensure that the access regime is properly functioning across all governments that it touches. The province of Alberta, the government of Alberta brought in municipalities to their ATIP regime only recently, and we know there's hiccups with that system, so there will be growing pains. But this motion tends to address that in a way that seeks to meet the concerns raised by municipalities and the stakeholders we heard from, and that the common complaint that governments, higher levels of government, continue to download responsibilities onto lower levels of government is addressed with real action that puts people at ease. And although we can't speak, the committee can't speak to any direct funding requests or compel the government to appropriate funds for this regime, we think it's appropriate that they at least assess the costs and have a realistic timeline for implementation that respects the integrity of community government operations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. To the motion. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I served on Yellowknife City Council 1997 to 2006, and certainly when I was on City Council, the position of the Northwest Territories Association of Communities was that access to information legislation should be applied to them. And I think what I heard during the public consultations was that municipalities are okay with that. They just want to make sure that they have the right kinds of support in place to allow that to happen. And the idea here of having a working group, some sort of a collaborative process of developing a plan for rolling this out is a great idea, and it'll involve municipal and community affairs, Department of Justice, municipalities themselves, probably through the N.W.T. to make sure that they have the right resources to do this, the right kind of support in terms of training, and perhaps even through the school community government. We want to make sure that our communities have the right support to do this and to get it right from the beginning. And that may mean a phased approach through with a tax-based community starting, or records of a certain date would be brought in, and older records through timers, whatever. I think there's a bunch of different options, but the idea is to get this group working at this and develop a plan for rolling this out. So I'm very happy to support this motion. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. To the motion, Minister Siebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're well aware of the issues that give rise to the motion, and thank committee for the recommendation. But as it is a recommendation, we will be abstaining. Thank you.
Thank you. To the motion, question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, committee. Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this Assembly recommends that the Minister of Justice propose for approval by the Commissioner in Executive Council amending the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act regulations to include housing associations incorporated under the Societies Act and housing authorities incorporated under Section 45 of the N.W.T. Housing Corporation Act as public bodies under the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. There's a motion on the floor. Motion is being distributed. The motion is in order. To the motion, Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as noted in our report on page 10, the inclusion of local housing association is something that the committee identified as a concern. However, as with any clause-by-clause review of legislation, the committee's role is to determine how best to address that concern. And in this case, committee felt that amendment to the law would be inconsistent with how the legislation operates to be inclusive of government agencies or public bodies, and that is through regulations. So the committee felt that the best way to address this concern of ensuring that local housing associations are properly included under the access to information regime is through the regulations. However, committee cannot change those regulations. That remains the sole prerogative of the minister and the commissioner in executive council. So the purpose of this motion is to send clear advice and direction to government that this is a concern. It needs to be addressed through changes to the regulations, and we hope that the government will carefully consider what's being proposed, review the very substantial commentary on this that's contained in the report and the committee's findings, and make those changes so we can ensure our access regime affects all public bodies in the Northwest Territories that are holding personal information of our citizens. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. To the motion, Minister Siebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I thank the committee, but again, we will be abstaining. Thank you.
Thank you. To the motion, question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, committee. Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this Assembly recommends the Department of Justice provide a response to the recommendations contained in this report within 120 days. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. There's a motion on the floor. It is being distributed. The motion is in order. To the motion. The question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Committee, do you agree that this concludes consideration of Committee Report 16-18 Bracket 3, Report on the Review of Bill 29, an Act to amend the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act? Thank you, Committee. This concludes consideration of Committee Report 16-18 Brackets 3, and we have agreed to next consider Bill 29, an Act to amend the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act. There are copies of the bill in the gray binders next to everyone's seat. I'll give committee a moment to get them ready. Committee, I will turn to the Minister responsible for Bill 29 to introduce it. Minister Siebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here today to discuss Bill 29, an Act to amend the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act. I would like to thank the Standing Committee on Government Operations for the review of this bill and for the productive feedback they provided. A number of motions were made in committee, and I believe the bill has improved as a result of the work with Standing Committee. Bill 29 amends the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act to improve public accountability, the protection of personal privacy, access to government information, and to ensure greater transparency and openness. The amendments include lowering fees and shortening timeframes for processing requests, and arise from recommendations received during the comprehensive review of the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act that was completed in 2017. The amendments are a result of extensive consultation with public bodies, the Information and Privacy Commissioner, and the public. All feedback received during the course of these consultations, including the Information and Privacy Commissioner's submissions and recommendations previously identified by the Standing Committee on Government Operations, were carefully considered. Specifically, the proposed amendments to the Act include changes to update and clarify provisions relating to purpose of the legislation, improve public access to information by responding to advances in technology and shortening timeframes for processing requests, provide greater clarity on existing exceptions and narrowing the focus of specific exceptions, acknowledge the operation of common or integrated services or programs across public bodies, and to provide greater clarity on disclosures supported by the Act, and provide for greater oversight of activities carried out under the Act, including new powers for the Information and Privacy Commissioner. The bill will also make a number of non-substantive miscellaneous amendments to improve the clarity and readability of specific provisions of the Act. I would be pleased to answer any questions that the members may have regarding Bill 29. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Siebert. I will now turn to the Chair of the Standing Committee on Government Operations, which is the committee that considered the bill, for any opening comments. Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I've spoken at length about the importance of this bill, and I'll refer the interested viewers back to the previous comments. But it is great legislation, and the one thing I will say is that the collaboration with the Minister's office was greatly appreciated. We've achieved consensus on every issue brought forward by the committee, and it has greatly improved the bill and shown just how effective this legislature can be when it puts its mind to collaborating on legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. Minister, do you have witnesses you wish to bring to the chamber?
Mr. Chair.
Sergeant at Arms, please escort the witnesses into the chamber. Minister, would you please introduce your witnesses for the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To my left is Denise Anderson, Manager, N.W.T Access and Privacy Office, Department of Justice. And to my right is Kelly McLaughlin, Legislative Counsel, Legislation Division, Department of Justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. So that was Ms. Anderson and McLaughlin. Thank you very much. I will now open the floor to general comments on Bill 29. Is there anything that is unsaid? Mr. Testart.
Mr. Chair, I move that the Committee of the Whole take a short recess. Thank you.
Take a recess. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. We'll take a brief recess.
I will call committee back to order. Does committee agree that there are no further comments to Bill 29? Agreed. Can we proceed to the clause-by-clause review of the bill? Okay. We will proceed in groups of 5. Committee, we will defer the bill number 29, and title until after consideration of the clauses. As said, we will do groups of 5. Please turn to page 1 of the bill. Clauses 1 to 5. Agreed. Clauses 6 to 10. Clauses 11 to 15. Clause 16. Clause 17. Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Clause 17 of Bill 29 be amended by deleting proposed Clause 24.1 and substituting the following. 24.1 brackets 1, subject to subsection brackets 2, the head of a public body shall refuse to disclose to an applicant labor relations information, A, the disclosure of which could reasonably be expected to reveal information supplied to or the report of an arbitrator, mediator, labor relations officer, or other person or body appointed to resolve or inquire into a labor relations matter, including information or records prepared by or for the public body in contemplation of litigation or arbitration, or in contemplation of a settlement offer. B, that is prepared or supplied implicitly or explicitly in confidence and is treated consistently as confidential information by the public body as the employer, and C, that could reasonably be expected to 1, harm the competitive position of the public body as an employer, 2, interfere with the negotiating position of the public body as an employer, or 3, result in significant financial loss or gain to the public body as an employer. 2, notwithstanding subsection brackets 1, the head of a public body shall disclose to an applicant who is a party to a labor relations matter any relevant information that the party would otherwise be entitled to receive in respect of the matter. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tensard. A motion has been made. The motion is being distributed. The motion is in order. To the motion. Mr. Tensard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some written comments here because this motion is quite complicated. Mr. Chair, Clause 17 of Bill 29 proposes to add a provision requiring that where someone makes an access to information request, the head of a public body must refuse to disclose labor relations information that could reveal information supplied to or the report of an arbitrator, mediator, labor relations officer, or other person dealing with a labor relations matter. The committee was concerned that the provision, as written in the bill, did not provide clear enough direction on what constitutes labor relations information. The committee was also concerned that the provision in the bill was too broad and could potentially exempt from disclosure a significant amount of information that would otherwise be available to an applicant. As such, the committee sought to narrow this provision so as to limit the exemption to a much narrower category of information. Both the Department of Justice's legislative drafters and the committee's law clerk proposed motions to address this concern. The motion before us today is the result of a compromise reached on these earlier drafts. It specifies, as did the original clause in the bill, that the head of a public body shall refuse to disclose labor relations information that could reveal information supplied to or the report of an arbitrator, mediator, labor relations officer, or other person dealing with a labor relations matter. But it further specifies that this includes information or records prepared by the public body in contemplation of litigation, arbitration, or a settlement offer. It also specifies that this further includes labor relations information that was developed in confidence by the public body as an employer and has been treated consistently as confidential information. Another notable feature of this motion is that to be protected from disclosure, labor relations information must also meet the following test: that it could harm the competitive position of the public body as an employer, that it could interfere with the negotiating position of a public body as an employer, or that it could result in significant financial loss or gain to the public body as an employer. Finally, Mr. Chair, the motion adds a subsection to the provision which provides that, notwithstanding the protections set out above, an applicant who is party to a labor relations matter must have access to any relevant information that the party would otherwise be entitled to receive with respect to the matter at hand. The committee believes this revised motion provides enough direction to strike an appropriate balance between privacy and access to labor relations information, such that highly confidential and personal labor relations related information is only disclosed to parties with a direct interest in a labor relations matter, while ensuring that broader types of labor relations information must only be withheld by public bodies where there is a risk of harm. The committee again thanks the Minister and his Cabinet colleagues for their support in amending Bill 29. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. Minister Sieber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As has been mentioned, this is a compromise, and a lot of work did go into this, and we will be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Sieber. To the motion. Questions have been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Clause 17, as amended. Agreed. Proceeding on with clauses 18 to 23, clauses 24 to 28, clauses 29 to 33, clauses 34 to 40. We will now return to the bill 29. An act to amend the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Okay. That Bill 29 is now ready for third reading.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that Bill 29, the Access to Information Protection Privacy Act, be deemed ready for third reading as amended. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Bill 29 is now ready for third reading as amended and reprinted. Does committee agree that this concludes our consideration of Bill 29? Thank you. Thank you, Minister, and thank you to the witnesses, Sergeant at Arms. Please escort the witnesses from the chamber. Thank you. Committee, we have agreed to consider Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act. It's in your binders. I will ask the minister responsible to introduce the bill, Minister Schuman.
I'm here today to introduce Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act. In the Northwest Territories, supply chain management professionals are licensed by the Supply Chain Management Association Northern Territories. This association sets the standards of excellence and ethics and is the source of professional development and accreditation for supply chain management in the Northwest Territories. Supply chain management professionals ensure that goods, people, and information are transported as safely and efficiently as possible. Prior to 2013, the Supply Chain Management Association Northern Territories was called the Northwest Territories Institute of Purchasing Management Association of Canada. Likewise, in 2013, the Certified Professional Purchaser designation was replaced with the Supply Chain Management Professional. The new Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act, which replaces the Purchasing Management Association Act, reflects these name changes. In addition, it will continue to ensure that only supply chain management professionals licensed by the Supply Chain Management Association Northern Territories are entitled to hold themselves out as professionals in the field of supply chain management. The Government of Northwest Territories values the hard work of supply chain management professionals who are imperative to the region's ongoing economic development, the provision of health services, and the transportation of food and supplies, among many other things. The proposed new Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act recognizes this hard work and will modernize the outdated Purchasing Management Association Act. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. I will now turn to the Chair of the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment, the committee that considered the bill, for opening comments. Mr. Van Tine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment concluded its review of Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act, on May 27, 2019, with a public hearing held at the Legislative Assembly building. The committee received a submission from Benita Noel, President of the Supply Chain Management Association Northern Territories Institute. Ms. Noel, on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Institute, expressed support for the bill, noting that it protects the designation used by supply chain management professionals in the Northwest Territories. The committee agrees and also supports the bill as outlined by the Minister. Individual members may have additional comments or questions as we proceed with consideration of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Van Tine. Minister, would you like to bring witnesses into the chamber?
Yes, I would, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Sergeant at Arms, please escort the witnesses into the chamber. Thank you. Minister, would you please introduce your witnesses?
Mr. Chair, on my left is Paul Guide, Deputy Minister of Infrastructure, and on my right is Laura Jeffries, Legislative Counsel, Department of Justice. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. I will now open the floor to general comments on Bill 35. Comments? Seeing none, does committee agree that there are no further comments? Thank you, committee. Can we proceed to a clause-by-clause review of the bill? Thank you. Committee, we will defer Bill 35, the Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act, until consideration of the clauses. There are 6 clauses in the bill, starting on page 1. We will go one by one to 6. Clause 1, Clause 2, Clause 3, Clause 4, Clause 5, Clause 6. We will now return to Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act. Does committee agree? Does committee agree that Bill 35 is now ready for third reading? Agreed. Okay, this one. Mr. Van Tine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act, be ordered to be read for a third time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Van Tine. To the motion? Questions have been called. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none. Amendments? Bill 35 is now ready for a third reading. Thank you, Minister. Thank you to your witnesses. Sergeant at Arms, please escort the witnesses from the chamber. Does committee agree that concludes committee of the whole? Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the chair rise and report progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. We will rise and report progress.
May I have the report, Member Satu?
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering Committee Report 16-18 brackets 3, Standing Committee on Government Operations Report on Bill 29, an act to amend the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Bill 29, an act to amend the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act, and would like to report progress. And Committee Report 16-18 brackets 3, Standing Committee of Government Operations Report on Bill 29, an act to amend the Access to Information Protection and Privacy Act, with 3 motions adopted. And Bill 29, an act to amend the Access to Information and Privacy Act. Oh, God. And Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act is ready for third reading. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with.
Massey, do I have a seconder? Member for Nahande. Motion's in order. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Massey. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Day 77, Thursday, May 30th, 1:30 p.m. Orders of the day. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, return to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery, acknowledgments, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to the Commissioner's opening address, petitions, reports of standing and special committees, reports of committees on the review of bills, tabling of documents, notices of motion, notices of motions for first reading of bills, Motion 38-18-3, first reading of bills, Bills 54, 55, 56, second reading of bills, consideration in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters, Bill 30, Committee Report 15-18-3, Minister Statement 151-18-3, Minister Statement 158-18-3, Report of Committee of the Whole, third reading of bills, Bills 29 and 35, orders of the day.
Mr. Clerk, did you May 30, 2019, in